Mr. Hankey?
Mr. Hankey is one of the most iconic secondary characters in all of South Park. In this video, we will be looking at every prominent episode starring the beloved festive feces, mainly discussing how the character has changed over the show's progression. Despite becoming the holiday mascot of this snowy mountain town, this theme came much later on and was not really the intended focus of the character. According to the mockumentary Going Down to South Park, Mr. Hankey was inspired by a true event that happened during Trey Parker's childhood. Supposedly, young Trey would often forget to flush the toilet, where his father Randy told him,
"If you don't flush the toilet, then Mr. Hankey's gonna jump out and kill you."
Starting off with more obscure appearances, Mr. Hankey can be seen briefly during the opening credits of the unaired pilot, but he never made it into the pilot episode itself. His design is definitely questionable compared to the finalized look we all know and appreciate. Thankfully, his prototype was changed considerably by slimming down the turd body and enhancing the facial features to be more cutesified. You can see an updated model of this in the first season episode, Damien, where the Devil's Child causes a chaotic tornado in the school cafeteria. Blink and you'll miss it because he only appears for a couple of frames of the animation. We officially meet the character in the debut episode, Mr. Hanky The Christmas Poo, which aired in December 1997. Rehearsing a school play, the children are performing the Christian nativity scene, which angers Kyle's mother. Since Carl Broflovsky is Jewish, she finds it offensive that her son is playing the role of Joseph, even though it can be argued Joseph of Arimathea was Jewish according to the New Testament. She demands that Kyle is not to take part in the nativity, but could perform something else, such as the dreidel song. He then suggests a different song, singing about Mr. Hanky the Christmas Poo, which nobody has ever heard of before.
Mr. Hanky the Christmas Poo, he loves me and I love you. Christmas Poo? What the hell is Christmas Poo?
Confused by the response from his classmates, Kyle feels isolated from the other boys. Where everybody else is enjoying the festivities, he is alone on Christmas. Fed up with their son's crass imagination, Kyle's parents force him to renounce Mr. Hankey, telling him to repeat that there is no such thing.
There is no such thing as Mr. Hankey.
Unwillingly, he does go along with this until he hears something peculiar coming from the toilet. To his astonishment, Mr. Hankey is real, and when trying to process this, the bathroom becomes soiled as Mr. Hankey sings and dances. Hearing the commotion upstairs, Gerald forces the door open where Kyle is caught holding a piece of inanimate poo.
Say something, Mr. Hankey!
Early on when designing the story concepts, this scene was planned out from the very beginning, and it's one of my personal favourites which never fails to get a laugh out of me. This is where Kyle starts to question his own sanity, where he tries to convince his friends that Hankey is real, but this backfires, making him look all the more crazy. By this point, I would suspect even the audience would begin to question Kyle's sanity. When Cartman breaks out into song about how Kyle's mother is a bitch, Mr. Hankey doesn't appreciate the disrespect and hurls himself at Cartman's cheek. Shocking everyone, Kyle is blamed for throwing doo-doo across the room, and not knowing how to handle the situation, Mr. Garrison recommends that he sees the school counselor. Interestingly, this is the debut appearance of Mr. Mackey, who is based on the school counselor Trey Parker had when growing up. Sympathizing with Kyle's situation, they discuss his concerning behavior and the difficulties of being a Jewish boy on Christmas. Making matters worse, Kyle sees Mr. Hankey casually bathing in Mackey's coffee mug. I absolutely love how this has since become such an iconic image, it's even been immortalized in South Park merchandise.
Oh my god, you sick little monkey!
When all hope is lost, Kyle is checked into a mental institution which is meant to be for his own good. I really appreciate the side plot featured throughout this episode, which I would argue is way ahead of its time. Due to the complaints received about the school nativity, the mayor tries to appease everyone by banning anything that makes reference to the holidays or faith so as not to offend. The end of this is arguably one of the worst school plays ever conceived, where Christmas is essentially banned. Chef steps in and asks about Kyle's whereabouts, where the boys explain how their close friend was losing his grip on reality, seeing an imaginary piece of Christmas poo.
You mean Mr. Hankey?
Huh?
Surprised that Chef even knows about Mr. Hankey, the other boys realize that Kyle was not crazy after all. Choosing now to believe in Christmas Poo, Mr. Hankey appears and saves the day from a violent outburst. I really like this ending sequence where Hankey restores the festivities in South Park, where he disappears into the night having completed his mission.
Bye-bye, man!
When a film festival comes to the town of South Park, the streets are busy with stars and critics looking to absorb as much independent film as possible. Taking advantage of this sudden publicity, Chef begins selling his homemade confectionery, including Chef's Chocolate Salty Balls, which is also the name of this episode. Thanks to the conveniently sold street food, the extra waste from the tourists has a negative impact on the sewer and in turn Mr. Hankey's ecosystem. And if this carries on, Mr. Hankey will die. When the boys climb into the sewer, they find him rowing a small boat made out of an empty carton. He appears to be getting sick and cannot visit the surface where the sun will dry him out. When Kyle pleads with a full theatre audience to stop damaging Mr. Hankey's environment, they do not take him seriously and instead think he's pitching a movie. With no other choice but to prove the existence of Mr. Hankey, Kyle convinces him to come to the surface. Sadly, this doesn't work, and similar to the first season episode, nobody sees the magic behind this talking piece of poo. Dried up and now struggling to stay alive, he is then hospitalized. As if having a piece of feces on life support wasn't already ludicrous enough, Chef gives him a chocolate salty ball, and like a miracle, this revives him. Kyle visits the grand opening of the Hollywood Planet landmark and tries again to stop the tourism. Even though Mr. Hankey is shown to be alive and well, the crowd bizarrely chooses to ignore him. Hankey takes the stage and elicits a message about improving the ecosystem and how the small mountain town simply doesn't have the room for a film festival. Once again, this falls on deaf ears, where he is then picked up and thrown at a wall. Presumed to be dead, Chef is once again able to revive him, which interestingly gives us a vengeful side to this lovable character. Swapping out the adorable sailor hat for a pointed wizard's hat, he dresses similarly to the Fantasia Mickey Mouse costume. Seeking his revenge, he casts a spell over the tourists by using a tsunami of shit to flood them out of town, thus saving South Park. Since this wasn't the official Christmas special for this season, I should give an honorable mention to the episode Merry Christmas Charlie Manson. It doesn't feature the real Mr. Hankey, but he is heavily referenced.
Gosh, you boys smell like flowers.
You're not the real Mr. Hankey.
Season 3 delivers with an alternative take on a festive episode which doesn't really have a story as such. Mr. Hankey hosts a musical special featuring residents of the mountain town offering their own holiday songs. After completing work on the South Park movie with composer Mark Shaman, Trey and Matt wanted to work on another project with him. 1 week prior to this episode airing on Comedy Central, they released an album titled Mr. Hankey's Christmas Classics. Made to accompany this album, the episode of the same name was animated to the music they had already produced, effectively advertising their product with a couple of exclusive songs as well. According to the DVD commentary, the album sales were not great, and so this episode would hopefully benefit the marketing. Trey and Matt expressed their regrets with choosing a more realistic album cover design since it wasn't made in South Park style. As expected, there is a lot of great musical talent to appreciate from this. I personally love the opening song choice introducing Mr. Hankey himself. Narrating this part of the episode, the wooden puppet style postman voiced by Trey is a fun homage to Santa Claus is Coming to Town, a stop motion movie from the early 70s.
Fighting the Frizzies at 11.
Returning in the Season 4 episode, A Very Crappy Christmas, Kyle stays up past his bedtime and waits by the toilet for Mr. Hankey, but oddly he doesn't show up. Assuming the worst, Kyle and the other boys take a trip to the sewers, only to discover Hankey is busy with his own family. Even though this is their only major appearance in the show, the family dynamic is hilarious and one of my favourite expanded elements to this character. We're introduced to his wife Autumn, who is portrayed as a struggling alcoholic, and the 3 children referred to as the Nuggets. Outside of the series, these characters are featured in the Stick of Truth video game where you complete a quest by finding all 3 of Hankey's children. I love the brutal exchange of dialogue between Hankey and Autumn where your player character awkwardly bears witness to domestic abuse. Interestingly, this episode makes use of the Spirit of Christmas short film which Trey and Matt came up with in the mid-90s. Recognizing that the Christmas spirit is absent from the town, the boys come up with a plan to reignite the festive feeling by screening a short film about the holidays. Showing how painful this process must have been, the boys use paper cutouts and begin to make a stop-motion movie inspired by a Charlie Brown special they catch on television. Overcoming some creative struggles, the boys complete their project, only for the screening to go wrong where Mr. Hankey accidentally breaks the projector. This then causes the townfolk to lose interest. When all hope is seemingly lost, we witness some father-son bonding between Cornwallis and Mr. Hankey. Both characters lean on each other for their emotional downfalls, and together they manage to salvage the movie, reigniting the Christmas spirit. And what exactly is the Christmas spirit? It all seems to boil down to commercialism, and by buying each other presents, everybody appears to benefit and be much happier. Red Sleigh Down is one of my favourite Christmas episodes, which mainly revolves around Eric Cartman and his selfish attitudes. He measures his year in quantities of good and bad gestures, and sadly due to his poor behaviour, it's not looking good.
If you cured cancer and AIDS next week, you would still owe 2 presents. Jesus Christ!
Looking to improve his behaviour for personal gain, Cartman comes up with the idea of bringing Christmas to the less fortunate in Iraq. Dragging all the festive decor and toys out of the house, Mr. Hankey appears out of nowhere and agrees to help the boys with Cartman's mission. Needing to get to the North Pole, we are introduced to the Poo Express, a train made completely out of sewage. This segment of the episode also features one of my favourite holiday songs from the show, where they all travel to go and meet Santa Claus. Loving Cartman's idea, Santa immediately steps into action, flying the sleigh out early to bring some festive joy to the Iraqi people. As expected, this goes wrong, where the country rejects the obvious sense of commercialism where Santa's sleigh is shot down. It appears that all hope is lost and that Christmas may have actually been ruined by Cartman's greed. Luckily, the boys pulled together and managed to save Santa with the help of Hankey and Jesus, who take their revenge on Iraq by forcing the holidays upon them. Aside from a few visual cameos, Mr. Hankey didn't have a spoken role until season 14. Ending episode 200 on a cliffhanger, the prophet of the Muslim faith, Muhammad, is supposedly hiding inside a bear mascot costume. 201 continues the story where the Gingers demand Muhammad steps out of the costume and reveals himself. With a twist, it's instead revealed to be Santa Claus, where Mr. Hankey steps in and apologizes to Kyle, hoping the switch would have worked in their favor. I Should Never Have Gone Ziplining from season 16 also features a vague cameo, just not in the way you may think. Based on genuine suffering Trey Parker experienced, the boys try to make the best of their last day of spring break and go ziplining together. Little do they realize this would become one of the most boring group activities they ever experience. Although I wasn't a massive fan of this episode, the live action scenes are hilarious. Changing up the formula, we see adult actors portraying the boys who are stuck on a boat together. Their goal is to get back to South Park, but the boredom of the day is near enough killing them all. Luckily, Mr. Hankey arrives and saves the day, where he is portrayed by a literal piece of shit in the live action segment. Making a return to animation, we see a selection of images showing off Pooh-related vehicles which were used to save the boys, including a return of the Poo Express. Making his final spoken appearance, the season 22 episode The Problem with a Poo is an emotional farewell to the character. Mr. Hankey is called into a meeting with the council, who regretfully inform him about budget cuts to the Christmas fund. Of course, this doesn't go well, where he is told that some people find him offensive. Accepting the lower budget, Mr. Hankey settles for the school children to perform music for his Christmas special, only to then tweet nasty things about them. Kyle confronts the seemingly joyful piece of poo, who blames his actions on taking sleep medication. He begs forgiveness, that he promises not to take Ambien again, and that he didn't mean to do it, but still continues to tweet horrible remarks. Confronted about another tweet, Mr. Hankey is fired from planning the Christmas event, where the town turned their back on him. He feels as though his civil rights have been breached and approaches several law firms about getting his job back. Again, thanks to some remarks he tweeted, it doesn't look good, where every lawyer in town turns their back on him also. With nobody else left to help him, he begs Kyle, the son of a lawyer, to take his case. With fond memories of their shared moments together, Kyle agrees to help with instant regret.
What did you mean last night when you tweeted, "The mayor of South Park is a titless whore"?
Walking out on the case, Kyle agrees to help Mr. Hankey one last time by bringing Christmas early to South Park. Surprisingly, things appear to be going well, only for the PC babies to cry at every reference to faith and the archaic wording of certain traditions. Despite their long-lasting friendship, Kyle and Hankey fight, where the entire town turns on them both. Looking at this episode objectively, the last conversation between these two characters makes for an emotionally compelling look at modern society. One fatal mistake in the public eye, and it's all over for you and anybody you associate with. And so, bringing the town's relationship with Mr. Hankey to an end, he is told to leave. Wondering where he will go, it's revealed that Mr. Hankey has gone to live in a town where outdated stereotypes are supposedly accepted, that being the town of Springfield. I like how this episode is spent setting up a joke revolving around the cancellation of the Apu character from The Simpsons, a series Trey and Matt hugely respect. From the episode title to the voiceover given to their version of Apu, this was a fantastic satire looking at the backward portrayal of cancelling public figures that are deemed too offensive in the modern world. For a beloved classic character like Mr. Hankey, it's surprising to see his story come to an end. He is referenced here and there, but so far he has not made a return to the show. Personally, as much as I loved the character, bringing him back would ultimately feel pointless looking back on this episode. With the show sticking with serialization in the most recent seasons, and having told many holiday episodes with Mr. Hankey, this episode feels like an appropriate send-off no matter how sad it is. I also like how in the deleted scenes, the origin of this character is surprisingly revealed, where he was apparently made by voodoo magic performed by a white person. Obviously, the latter detail is apparently a touchy subject. And on that note, that's going to do it for this video looking at every prominent appearance of Mr. Hankey. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to leave me a like down below. Let me know in the comments what your favourite festive episode of South Park is. And for more similar content, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, DVD Review Studios.
Are you threatening me?